The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and made every heartbeat feel like a drumbeat in an empty hall. The human warrior, a man named Kale, crouched low behind the jagged rocks of an alien landscape, his breath shallow and controlled. His armor bore the scars of countless battles, scratches from claws, dents from energy blasts. But tonight, it was not just his body that carried the weight of exhaustion. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. How had he ended up here? What was this place? And why did it feel so alive? Kale's journey to this moment had been anything but ordinary. It began on Earth, or at least what remained of it, a planet ravaged by decades of war between humans and their own creations, machines gone rogue. He had been part of the last resistance, fighting for survival in a world where hope seemed as scarce as clean air. But then came the portal, a swirling vortex of light and sound that appeared out of nowhere during one of their skirmishes. Desperate and outnumbered, Kale had leapt through without thinking, hoping it would lead somewhere safe. Instead, it spat him out onto this alien terrain, under twin suns that painted the sky in hues of violet and gold. For days, or perhaps weeks, time felt distorted here. He wandered aimlessly, scavenging for food and water while avoiding the strange creatures that roamed the land. Some were docile, others aggressive, but all shared one unsettling trait. They seemed to watch him with an intelligence far beyond any animal instinct. Their eyes followed his every move, as if sizing him up, deciding whether he posed a threat or merely curiosity. It wasn't until the third cycle of the sun's rise and fall that Kale stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, a structure unlike anything he'd ever seen. Rising from the horizon like a mountain carved by gods, its surface shimmered with iridescent colors that shifted depending on the angle of the light. Towers spiraled upward in impossible curves, defying gravity, while bridges of translucent material connected them in intricate patterns. It looked less like architecture and more like a living organism frozen mid-motion. As Kale approached cautiously, he noticed symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly with a soft blue luminescence. They pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Each step closer sent shivers down his spine, though he couldn't tell if it was fear or awe driving the sensation. The air around the structure hummed with energy, vibrating against his skin and making his hair stand on end. Whatever this place was, it was alive, or at least powered by something otherworldly. He found an entrance eventually, a massive archway framed by twisting vines of metal that writhed slowly, as though breathing. Stepping inside felt like crossing into another dimension entirely. The interior was vast, cavernous, yet warm despite its size. Bioluminescent plants hung from the ceiling, casting pools of greenish light across the floor, which itself appeared to ripple like liquid glass. Strange sounds echoed softly around him, clicks, whistles, murmurs, that didn't seem mechanical but organic, as if the building itself communicated in some ancient tongue. Kale moved deeper, drawn forward by an inexplicable pull. Every corridor he turned down led him further into the heart of the structure, each room revealing wonders that left him speechless. There were chambers filled with floating orbs that emitted melodies when touched, walls covered in moving murals depicting scenes of celestial battles, and pools of liquid silver that reflected not his image, but visions of distant stars and galaxies. But it was the scent that finally stopped him dead in his tracks, a mix of honey and ozone, sweet yet sharp, filling the air with an intoxicating allure. Following it led him to a door unlike the others. Made of what looked like polished obsidian, it radiated heat even before he touched it. As his fingers brushed the surface, the door slid open silently, revealing a chamber bathed in golden light. And there she was. She sat atop a throne forged from crystalline roots that twisted upward like frozen lightning, her presence commanding every ounce of attention in the room. She was tall, taller than any being Kale had ever encountered, her form both humanoid and distinctly alien. Her skin shimmered like molten gold, catching the light in ways that made it seem as though she wore the sun itself. Her eyes, oh her eyes, were vast pools of swirling galaxies, endless depths that seemed to pierce straight through him, reading his soul like an open book. Her hair flowed around her like a living entity, strands of silvery white that danced in an unseen breeze, occasionally sparking with tiny motes of light. Around her neck hung a necklace of gemstones that pulsed faintly, each stone resonating with a different tone, creating a symphony that filled the room. Her garments were simple yet regal, flowing robes of deep indigo adorned with intricate embroidery that glowed faintly, matching the rhythm of her breathing. Kale froze, his instincts screaming at him to flee, yet his legs refused to obey. Something about her presence rooted him to the spot, a mixture of terror and reverence washing over him. He realized belatedly that he was staring, his jaw slack, his weapon hanging uselessly at his side. Gathering what little composure he could muster, he dropped to one knee, bowing his head in a gesture of respect, or perhaps submission. "Forgive me," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I did not mean to intrude." A low chuckle rippled through the air, rich and melodic, sending shivers down his spine. "Intrude," she repeated, her voice resonating like a chorus of bells. "You are no intruder, human. You are unexpected." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Cale dared to lift his gaze slightly, meeting her eyes once more. They held no malice, only curiosity, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. Compassion, amusement, or perhaps pity. "I am called Solari," she said, leaning forward slightly. Her movements were fluid, graceful, like water flowing over stone. "Queen of the Velani. And you?" "Cale," he replied hoarsely. "Just Cale." "Just Cale," she echoed, tilting her head as though tasting the sound of his name. "Tell me, just Cale, how did you come to find yourself in my domain?" Her question caught him off guard. How could he explain the chaos of his arrival, the desperate leap through the portal, the disorienting journey across this alien world? He hesitated, searching for the right words, but before he could speak, she raised a hand, silencing him. "No matter," she said softly. "Your story is written in your eyes, in the lines of your weary face. You carry the weight of many battles, do you not?" Cale nodded mutely, unsure whether to feel exposed or understood. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, he thought he saw sadness flicker in those galaxy-like eyes. "You are far from home," she continued, her tone gentle now. "But perhaps fate has brought you here for a reason." Before Cale could respond, the queen rose from her throne, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She stepped down from the dais, her bare feet making no sound against the crystalline floor. As she approached, Cale instinctively lowered his head again, though her presence demanded nothing of the sort. When she stopped mere paces away, he felt the warmth radiating from her, not just physical heat but an aura of power and grace that left him awestruck. "Look at me, Cale," she commanded softly, and he obeyed, lifting his eyes to meet hers. Up close, her features were even more striking, her beauty transcending anything he had ever imagined. Yet it was not her appearance that held him captive. It was the wisdom in her gaze, the sense that she saw not just who he was, but who he could be. "Do you know why you are here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale shook his head, his throat too dry to speak. She studied him for a long moment, then turned and gestured for him to follow. Reluctantly, he rose to his feet, his legs stiff from kneeling, and trailed after her as she moved deeper into the chamber. The walls shimmered with faint lights, responding to her presence like living things, and the air grew warmer, tinged with the same honeyed scent that had drawn him here in the first place. They stopped before a large, circular pedestal in the center of the room. On its surface lay an object unlike anything Cale had ever seen, a sphere roughly the size of his fist, pulsating with a soft, rhythmic glow. Its surface was smooth and cool to the touch, yet it seemed to hum with energy, vibrating faintly beneath his fingertips when he reached out instinctively. "This," Solari said, her voice reverent, "is the heart of Vela." Cale stared at the sphere, his mind struggling to comprehend its significance. "What is it?" he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. "It is the essence of our world," she explained, her tone taking on a somber edge. "The source of life, balance, and harmony for all who dwell here. Without it, Vela would wither, its people lost to despair and chaos." As she spoke, images began to form in the air around them, holographic projections of lush forests, sprawling cities, and beings of all shapes and sizes coexisting peacefully. Cale watched in awe as the scene shifted, showing glimpses of prosperity and unity. But then the images changed, growing darker. The skies turned gray, the forests wilted, and the beings fell into conflict, their faces twisted with anger and sorrow. "What happened?" Cale asked, his voice trembling. "The heart was stolen," Solari replied, her expression grim. taken by forces that seek to exploit its power for domination. Since then, Vela has been dying, piece by piece. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. Who took it? Her gaze hardened, and for the first time, he saw anger in her eyes. A faction known as the Zithari. They are ruthless, driven by greed and ambition. They believe the heart will grant them ultimate control over not just Vela, but all worlds. But Kale hesitated, his brow furrowing. If it's right here, in front of us, then why hasn't it been returned? Solari sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly as though burdened by the weight of her next words. This is not the true heart, she admitted. It is a fragment, a shard of its former self. The rest lies scattered across dimensions, hidden to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. Kale's mind reeled. And you think I can help you get it back? She nodded slowly. Fate brought you here for a reason, Kale. You carry within you the resilience of your kind, the ability to endure and overcome. If anyone can retrieve the fragments, it is you. But I'm just a soldier, he protested, shaking his head. I don't know the first thing about navigating dimensions or fighting beings like the Zithari. You underestimate yourself, she countered firmly. Strength is not measured solely by skill or knowledge. It is also found in courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for what is right. These qualities reside within you, Kale. I see them clearly. Her words struck a chord deep within him, stirring emotions he had long buried beneath layers of pain and loss. 4 years, he had fought simply to survive, never allowing himself to believe in anything greater. But now, standing in the presence of this queen and her dying world, he felt something awaken, a spark of purpose, however fragile. If I agree to help, he began cautiously, what happens next? Solari extended her hand toward the pedestal, and the sphere floated gently into the air, hovering between them. Take this fragment, she instructed. It will guide you to the others. It will show you the way. Kale hesitated, his hand hovering inches from the glowing orb. And if I fail? Her expression softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then Vela will fade, and the Zithari will grow stronger. But failure is not written in your future, Kale. Trust in yourself, as I trust in you. With that, she stepped back, giving him space to make his decision. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the fragment, its light pulsing steadily, as though waiting for him to act. Kale took a deep breath, steeling himself against the enormity of the task ahead. Then, slowly, he reached out and grasped the sphere. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through his body, lighting up every nerve ending with a searing intensity. Images flooded his mind, distant landscapes, unfamiliar faces, cryptic symbols, all flashing by too quickly to process. He staggered backward, nearly dropping the fragment, but Solari steadied him with a firm grip. It has chosen you, she said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. Now, go. Begin your journey, Kale. The fate of Vela, and perhaps more, rests in your hands. As Kale stood there, clutching the fragment tightly, he realized that his life had changed forever. No longer was he merely a soldier fighting for survival. He was now a guardian of hope, tasked with a mission that stretched beyond comprehension. And as daunting as it seemed, he knew one thing for certain: turning back was no longer an option. Guided by the fragment's pulsating glow, Kale ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the Queen's sanctuary. The path unfolded before him like a living tapestry, each step illuminating new passages and hidden chambers. The fragment seemed to resonate with the very walls, causing the bioluminescent flora to bloom brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced along the crystalline floors. As he moved, the air thickened with an electric charge, a palpable energy that prickled his skin and quickened his pulse. The journey was not without its trials. At one turn, a sudden tremor shook the structure, causing shards of crystal to rain down from the ceiling. Kale dove aside, narrowly avoiding a jagged spike that embedded itself into the floor where he had stood moments before. Breathing heavily, he glanced at the fragment, which now pulsed more urgently, urging him onward. It was as if the artifact sensed danger and sought to guide him away from harm. Further along, he encountered a chamber filled with floating orbs similar to those he had seen earlier, but these were larger, their surfaces rippling with storm-like patterns. As he entered, The orbs began to drift toward him, emitting low, resonant tones that vibrated through his chest. Instinctively, he raised his weapon, but the fragment in his hand grew warm, calming his nerves. He hesitated, lowering his guard, and extended his free hand toward the nearest orb. To his astonishment, it responded, drifting closer and enveloping his palm in a soft, cool light. A flood of images and sensations washed over him, visions of star systems, ancient rituals, and whispered secrets of the universe. The experience left him dizzy but enlightened, as if he had glimpsed a fraction of the cosmos' infinite knowledge. Emerging from the chamber, Kale found himself in a grand hall dominated by a colossal mural that spanned the entire length of the wall. The artwork depicted a cosmic battle between two opposing forces, one radiant and harmonious, the other dark and chaotic. In the center stood a figure resembling Solari, holding aloft a glowing orb identical to the fragment he carried. The scene was both inspiring and foreboding, a reminder of the stakes involved in his quest. At the far end of the hall, a set of massive double doors awaited, their surfaces etched with runes that shimmered with the same blue luminescence as the symbols outside. The fragment pulsed wildly as he approached, indicating that this was the gateway he sought. Placing his hand against the door, he felt a surge of energy course through him, and the doors parted with a resonant hum, revealing a breathtaking vista beyond. Before him stretched an expansive bridge suspended over a chasm of swirling mists, leading to a distant platform bathed in ethereal light. The sight filled Kale with a mixture of awe and trepidation. This was no ordinary path. It was a threshold to realms unknown, a conduit to the fragments scattered across dimensions. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the bridge, feeling the solid yet yielding surface beneath his boots. The fragment in his hand glowed brighter with each step, guiding him forward like a beacon in the void. As he crossed, the mists below churned and writhed, forming vague shapes that seemed to reach for him. Shadows loomed at the edges of his vision, whispering voices that tugged at his resolve. Yet the fragment's steady rhythm anchored him, its light cutting through the encroaching darkness. With each stride, Kale felt a growing connection to the artifact, as if it were awakening dormant parts of his consciousness, unlocking potential he never knew he possessed. Reaching the platform, he paused to take in the surroundings. Here, the air shimmered with a kaleidoscope of colors, and the ground sparkled like crushed diamonds underfoot. In the center of the platform stood a pedestal similar to the one in Solari's chamber, though this one was surrounded by a ring of floating stones, each inscribed with intricate patterns. The fragment in his hand reacted strongly to their presence, pulling him inexorably toward them. Placing the fragment onto the pedestal, Kale watched as the stones began to orbit it, spinning faster and faster until they formed a vortex of light and energy. The air crackled with power, and a portal emerged, its surface rippling like liquid silver. Through it, he could glimpse fleeting images of alien landscapes and strange beings, beckoning him to step through. Taking a final look back at the bridge he had crossed, Kale steeled himself for what lay ahead. The fragment's glow intensified, as if encouraging him, and with a deep breath, he stepped into the portal. The world dissolved around him in a cascade of light and sound, propelling him into the unknown. His journey had only just begun, and the challenges awaiting him promised to test every fiber of his being. But armed with the fragment's guidance and Solari's faith, Kale embraced the uncertainty, ready to face whatever destiny had in store. Through the portal, Kale emerged into a realm unlike any he had ever encountered. The sky above was a swirling mass of crimson clouds, streaked with veins of molten gold that pulsed like arteries pumping lifeblood into the atmosphere. Beneath his feet, the ground was composed of shifting sands that shimmered with iridescent hues, each grain reflecting the chaotic brilliance of the heavens. Towering spires of black crystal jutted from the landscape, their jagged forms reaching skyward like the broken teeth of some ancient beast. The air was thick with static electricity, raising the hairs on his arms and making the fragment in his hand hum with an almost unbearable intensity. As Kale took his first cautious steps, he became aware of movement in the periphery of his vision. Turning sharply, he caught sight of shadowy figures darting between the spires, their forms indistinct but unmistakably hostile. They moved with unnatural speed, their presence marked by faint whispers that slithered through the charged air. The fragment pulsed violently, warning him of danger, and he tightened his grip on his weapon, prepared for an ambush. The creatures revealed themselves soon enough, emerging from the shadows with predatory grace. They were tall and gaunt, their elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws that gleamed with a venomous sheen. Their faces, if they could be called that, were featureless masks of obsidian, save for glowing red fissures where eyes should have been. They circled him slowly, their movements synchronized, as though guided by a single malevolent intelligence. Kale's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm, drawing upon the lessons of countless battles fought on Earth. He planted his feet firmly in the shifting sands, raising his weapon and scanning the encircling predators. "Come on, then," he shouted, his voice cracking with defiance. The creatures halted their advance momentarily, tilting their heads as if puzzled by his audacity. Then, with a collective hiss that sounded like tearing silk, they lunged. The first attack came from behind, forcing Kale to spin and parry with his blade. The creature's claws sparked against the metal, leaving scorch marks that sizzled with acidic residue. Another lunged from the side, and he sidestepped just in time, driving his elbow into its torso with enough force to send it sprawling. But for every blow he landed, 2 more attackers closed in, their numbers overwhelming. Desperation clawed at the edges of his mind, but the fragment in his hand flared brighter, bathing the battlefield in a blinding white light. The creatures recoiled, shielding their fisher-like eyes with clawed hands. Seizing the opportunity, Kale unleashed a flurry of strikes, his movements fueled by adrenaline and the fragment's pulsating energy. One by one, the shadowy figures collapsed, dissolving into wisps of smoke that were swiftly carried away by the wind. Breathing heavily, Kale surveyed the aftermath, his muscles trembling with exertion. The fragment dimmed slightly, its glow now steady and comforting. He allowed himself a brief moment of respite before pressing onward, knowing that this victory was only a reprieve. The path led him to a valley nestled between the towering spires, its floor carpeted with luminous fungi that emitted a soft, lavender glow. In the center of the valley stood a monolithic structure, its surface etched with runes that mirrored those on the fragment. As he approached, the runes began to glow, casting intricate patterns of light across the ground. The fragment in his hand vibrated with increasing urgency, pulling him toward the structure like a magnet. Inside, the air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere outside. The walls were lined with shelves containing artifacts of unknown origin, crystalline orbs, metallic scrolls, and vials filled with swirling liquids. At the far end of the chamber, a pedestal awaited, its surface engraved with the same constellation-like pattern as the fragment. Resting atop it was another shard, identical in appearance but radiating a faint, emerald hue. Kale hesitated, sensing that this moment was pivotal. The fragment in his hand pulsed in sync with the shard on the pedestal, as if yearning to reunite. Slowly, he reached out and lifted the shard, feeling a surge of energy course through him. Visions flooded his mind once more, images of Solari's world before its decline, vibrant and teeming with life. He saw the queen herself, younger and unburdened by grief, presiding over a council of beings from across the galaxy. The connection between the fragments was undeniable, a bond forged by something far greater than mere chance. But as he absorbed the shard's energy, a low rumble shook the chamber, and the runes on the walls flared brightly. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence exuding menace. It stepped into the light, revealing a humanoid form clad in sleek, obsidian armor adorned with jagged spikes. Its face was obscured by a mask resembling a snarling beast, and its eyes burned with a cold, calculating fury. "You dare trespass here, human?" the figure growled, its voice layered with distortion. "The shards belong to the Zithari. Hand them over, or perish." Kale tightened his grip on the fragments, his resolve hardening. "Over my dead body," he spat, raising his weapon. The figure chuckled darkly, unsheathing a blade that crackled with dark energy. "As you wish." The ensuing battle was brutal and relentless. The Zithari warrior fought with precision and ferocity, its blade slicing through the air with lethal intent. Kale countered with equal determination, his movements bolstered by the fragment's combined energy. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed, the sound echoing through the chamber like thunder. Despite the odds, Kale held his ground, driven by the knowledge that failure meant doom not only for Solari's world but for countless others. With a final, desperate strike, he disarmed his opponent, sending the dark blade clattering to the floor. The Zithari staggered back, its mask cracking to reveal a visage twisted by rage and hatred. "You cannot stop us," it snarled, vanishing into a swirl of shadows before Kale could deliver the finishing blow. Exhausted but victorious, Kale sank to his knees, cradling the fragments close. The chamber fell silent, save for the gentle hum of the reunited shards. Though the immediate threat had passed, he knew this was merely the beginning. The Zithari would not relent, and the road ahead promised even greater peril. Yet as he rose to his feet, a newfound determination burned within him. The fragments were more than tools, they were keys to restoring balance, symbols of hope in a fractured universe. And Kale, the reluctant warrior thrust into a cosmic struggle, vowed to see their mission through, no matter the cost. Kale stood amidst the aftermath of the battle, his body aching and his mind racing. The fragments in his hands pulsed with a steady rhythm, their combined energy filling him with a sense of purpose that transcended exhaustion. He knew he couldn't linger here. The Zithari warrior's disappearance was no victory. It was a retreat, a strategic withdrawal. They would regroup, grow stronger, and come for him again. But this time, they wouldn't underestimate him. Steeling himself, Kale stepped out of the chamber and back into the valley. The glowing fungi cast eerie shadows across the ground, and the crimson sky above churned ominously, as if reflecting the turmoil within him. He glanced at the fragments, now resonating together like two halves of a broken whole. A map began to form in his mind, not physical, but intuitive, a path etched into his consciousness by the shard's guiding light. It pointed toward another dimension, another fragment waiting to be reclaimed. The journey ahead was daunting, but Kale felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. Not just for himself, but for Solari, for her people, and perhaps even for Earth. If he succeeded, if he could restore the heart of Vela, then maybe, just maybe, he could bring balance not only to this alien world but to his own shattered one as well. The next portal opened in a realm of perpetual twilight, where the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. Here, gravity seemed distorted, pulling at Kale from odd angles as he walked. Strange creatures floated lazily through the air, their translucent bodies shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. Some watched him curiously, while others darted away, startled by his presence. Despite the surreal beauty of the landscape, Kale remained vigilant, knowing danger could manifest in any form. It wasn't long before he encountered resistance. This time, it came not from shadowy predators or armored warriors, but from illusions crafted to prey on his deepest fears. As he traversed the shifting terrain, visions of his past haunted him, memories of battles lost, comrades fallen, and moments of failure replayed vividly before his eyes. Each apparition whispered doubts into his ears, urging him to give up, to accept that his efforts were futile. But Kale had faced despair before. Drawing strength from the fragments, he pushed forward, refusing to let the phantoms consume him. With each step, the illusions grew weaker, until finally, they dissolved entirely, leaving behind a single crystalline shard embedded in the ground. Retrieving it, Kale felt its warmth spread through him, reinforcing his resolve. 3 fragments now rested in his possession, their combined energy amplifying his connection to the cosmos itself. Yet with each success came greater challenges. The Zithari were relentless, their agents appearing in increasingly formidable forms. In one realm, Kale found himself battling constructs of pure energy, their forms shifting unpredictably as they attacked. In another, he navigated treacherous landscapes riddled with traps designed to ensnare intruders. Through it all, the fragments served as both weapon and shield, their power growing stronger with each trial overcome. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, Kale reached the last fragment. Its location was revealed to him in a vision during a brief moment of rest, a towering citadel suspended in the void of space, surrounded by swirling nebulae and guarded by an army of Zithari drones. Approaching the structure required navigating a gauntlet of hazards, including asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies that threatened to tear his ship apart. But Kale pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was the final piece needed to complete the heart of Vela. When he breached the citadel's defenses, he was met by none other than the leader of the Zithari, a towering figure clad in blackened armor adorned with jagged spires. Its mask bore the likeness of a dragon, its eyes burning with an intensity that made Kale's skin crawl. This was the architect of chaos, the being responsible for scattering the fragments and plunging Vela into ruin. "You've done well to make it this far," the leader sneered, its voice echoing like thunder. "But your journey ends here. The ensuing battle was unlike anything Kale had faced before. The Zithari leader wielded weapons forged from dark matter, capable of warping reality itself. Time slowed, sped up, and reversed around them as they clashed, forcing Kale to rely on instinct rather than logic. The fragments responded to his desperation, their energy surging to protect him from lethal blows and empowering his counterattacks. Despite the odds, Kale fought with everything he had. Every strike, every dodge, every ounce of strength was fueled by the lives depending on him. The queen who had placed her trust in him, the dying world she ruled, and the countless innocents caught in the crossfire of the Zithari's greed. When the leader unleashed a devastating blast intended to obliterate him, Kale channeled the full power of the fragments, creating a barrier of pure light that absorbed the attack and redirected it back at its source. The explosion shook the citadel, sending debris cascading into the void. When the dust settled, Kale stood victorious, though battered and bloodied. Before him lay the final fragment, its glow brighter than ever. As he picked it up, the other pieces flew from his pouch, merging together in a dazzling display of light. The completed heart of Vela hovered before him, a radiant orb pulsing with life and energy. Returning to Solari's chamber felt surreal. The once dim halls were now alive with vibrant colors, as if the structure itself recognized the return of its core. When Kale entered the throne room, Solari rose to meet him, her expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You have done the impossible," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You have restored the heart of Vela." Kale knelt before her, presenting the orb with reverence. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "The fragments guided me, and your faith gave me strength." As Solari took the heart, the chamber erupted in a symphony of light and sound. The walls shimmered, the air vibrated with harmony, and the very essence of Vela seemed to awaken. Life returned to the world outside, forests blooming anew and skies clearing to reveal twin suns shining brightly. But Kale's thoughts turned to Earth. "Your world is saved," he said, rising to his feet. "But mine still suffers. Can the heart help us too?" Solari smiled gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The heart's power is infinite, Kale. And so is yours. You have proven yourself a guardian of balance, a beacon of hope. Go home, and take this gift with you. Use it wisely." With those words, she opened a portal leading back to Earth. Stepping through, Kale found himself standing once more beneath familiar skies, the heart of Vela cradled in his arms. Though scars remained from the wars that had ravaged his planet, he saw possibilities where once there had been despair. For the first time in years, Kale believed in a future worth fighting for. And so, armed with newfound purpose and the power of the heart, Kale set out to heal not just his world, but the galaxy beyond. His journey was far from over, but now, he walked it not as a lone warrior, but as a harbinger of unity and renewal.